Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very excited about our webinar today with Doug Smith. We'll be covering note buying and setting the price. A few things I want to cover before we get started. We'll give everyone a chance to go ahead and log in. All right, so here at NewView, a few things. We are non-fiduciary. We are not CPAs, we are not tax advisors. What we are is a third-party custodian. We do suggest all our clients do their own due diligence before making any investments. They would always want to consult with an attorney, an accountant, a financial advisor before entering any type of investments. A little bit of background on NewView. So NewView's been in business since 2003. Like I mentioned, we are a regulated public trust company. So 17 years in business, actually almost 18 now, it's almost 2021. Our compliance office is located in South Dakota and our admin office is in Orlando, Florida. We custody almost 1.5 billion in client assets and we have about 10,000 clients. A few things that we do take pride on is that we are simple to do business with. We are available and responsive. We actually get graded on answering our phones 100% of the time. We shoot for 98% that you will get a live person on the phone every time you call NewView. And if you are on hold, we do not want you on hold more than 2 minutes at the most. You're always welcome to leave a voicemail, contact us via email, and we will reply to you within the same day. So a few things. I'm really excited about our guest presenter today. His name is Doug Smith. Doug Smith has spent 20 years in banking and lending with two of the largest banks in the world. And he later worked with a troubled community bank, which is where he handled special assets. In other words, delinquent loans. For the past 10 years, he's managed a private equity firm that buys and sells non-performing loans and distressed real estate. So with all of that experience, I'm very excited to introduce Doug Smith. All right, Doug, go ahead and unmute yourself and we can get started.
So, can you hear me now? As the
All yours.
says. Fantastic. Well, thank you for that nice introduction. I appreciate it. I am Doug Smith, and I actually have a formal credit background, which is a little bit different than most of the folks that invest in notes. I came out of the banking sector, and as Brian said, after spending many years with some of the largest banks in the world, I transferred over to a troubled community bank where I had the opportunity to enter into special assets. And that's where the light bulb went off. Now, if you don't know what special assets are and you're trying to buy notes, that's a term that you probably will want to familiarize yourself with. Because that, if you walk into a bank branch and say, I want to buy your troubled loans, they're going to look at you like you've got three heads. What's going to happen is that person's not even going to know where to go. What you want to ask for is the person that handles the special assets or the troubled loans. That's usually someone in a back office somewhere. So I actually did that with a troubled community bank, worked closely with the board of directors to try to clean up their portfolio. And that's when the light bulb went off that I can sell these assets as a banker to individuals, private funds, people that are investing in their IRA. So we can actually sell the loan off at a discount, get them off of our books. And that's really what you came here to talk about today. Now, I can't squeeze everything that I learned in 30 years of banking and managing this private equity fund into 30 minutes. I just can't do it. So we chose to limit the topic to setting the price. So in other words, how does our fund, how do we actually decide to sell the price or set the price on the assets that we actually buy? Now, what I'm doing, though, is I'm actually only using tools that are available to you. In other words, to the average individual, the average consumer. We do have some algorithms that we use behind the scenes that we've taken a long time to develop. But honestly, it can be done very simply, and I'm going to teach you how to do that today. But I want to do my own disclaimers here as well. What this webinar is not, it's not exhaustive. As I said, I can't squeeze 30 years into 30 minutes. It's not legal advice. And I'm not going to be covering a lot of things like underwriting, where to find loans to buy, how to set up a fund, how to raise capital, the collection process, all of those things. I'm not covering it today, but I am happy to come back and do that. And towards the end of this, My contact information will be on a slide. So if you'd like to reach out to me personally, I'd be happy to try to answer your questions the best I can for you. So let's try to move through this the best I can here, and bear with me. This is the first slide. There is a little bit of a lag there. I'm very sorry about that. Brian, are you seeing that move? All right, I'm going to keep talking. So the next slide, actually, what it's going to show you, and it should catch up here in just a second.
Just click the screen once, and then
did.
your arrow key. Did that work?
Yeah, it's not moving. Yeah, it's not moving, but that's okay. We're going to go ahead. Aha, there we go. There we go. This is actually a stripped down presentation of something that we actually originally developed to last over a 3-day time period. But we're only going to cover certain things. Number one, section 4 here, which is how to value the net present value of the cash flows, meaning if the person pays you, how do you actually value that to be able to hit your actual targeted yield? Also, what the value of the collateral is. In other words, what happens if they don't pay you? And then finally, how do we derive at what we call the strike price, which is the maximum amount that we would be willing to buy for any kind of loan that we buy. I need to click these because there is a little bit of a delay, so to speak. But let's start talking a little bit about what a note is and what it isn't. You got control of that? Yeah, Brian, it's not moving for me, my man. So hopefully he'll be able to shake that out while I talk to you. So let's talk about what a note actually is. A note, people go to the bank and say, I want to get a mortgage. I want to get a mortgage loan. Well, a mortgage is really just the security interest that is filed at the county courthouse in which the property is located. You're actually buying the promissory note and all the notes and all the documents that come along with it, which does include either the deed of trust or the mortgage, depending upon the state you're in. I'm going to try to do this again. Brian, I do.
Yeah, just try to click the screen again.
Yeah, I just tried it.
And then go ahead and change the slide.
I'm doing the best I can here. There's some kind of lag. Folks, I apologize, but we'll make sure that we get this right for you.
There you go.
Okay, there we go. Wonderful. So we're going to talk, I do want to cover two of the things that are included in a loan file. Number one is the promissory note. Now that's actually your promise to repay the loan. So if you go in and borrow money from a bank to buy a piece of property or to refinance a piece of property, the promissory note is going to have all of the terms. It's your promise to repay the loan. That's why it's called a promissory note. It's going to have the interest rate, it's going to have the payment amounts, the terms, and everything else. Now, dependent upon the state that you're in, and we're going to talk about that just in a second, is the mortgage or the deed of trust. The mortgage and the deed of trust simply pledges that piece of property as collateral. So how do we know whether the state is either a mortgage state or a deed of trust state? Well, that's actually pretty simple. Let's first of all talk about something called a lien theory state. And I've taken the time to kind of list the different states that are lien theory states. Some of you may know them as a judicial state, where you have to actually go to court in order to foreclose on a property. This is where it takes these states take a little bit longer to process because the courts are actually involved. But what happens is you as the borrower maintain ownership of the property, but you are actually putting a lien against the property. Therefore, you're signing what's called a mortgage. You still pay the taxes, the insurance, everything else, and you actually still own the property. But if things go bad, then that lender has the right to come back and sue you, so to speak, to get the property back. And that's what a foreclosure actually is. Now, in a deed theory state, it's very different. I absolutely love working in deed theory states. One of my favorite states to work in is, for instance, Missouri, which is deed theory. Where in Florida, my home state, I'm based in the Tampa area. That might take 18 months or so to get through the entire foreclosure process on average. Where in a deed theory state, it might only take 4 months tops. It's pretty quick. So what a deed theory state does is you sign a deed of trust. So you're technically deeding the property to a trustee who is either the bank's attorney or someone with the bank that basically holds on to the property until you pay it off. And you're still paying the insurance, you're still paying the taxes. So kind of you have interest, you kind of have ownership in it, but you really don't because you deeded a deed of trust to a trustee to hold until you pay it back. And then once you've paid off the loan, then the trustee actually signs what's called a deed of reconveyance, which actually reconveys that property back to you. In this way, though, if you quit making your payments and you're in the borrower, then they don't have to go to court typically to be able to get that property back. So it's a lot faster process. So very important to understand, because later on we're going to be talking about the time value of money and how long you're actually holding onto the asset to be able to get your money back when you buy a loan. And so deed of trust states or a deed theory state, a lien theory state, very, very important to think about. So let's talk about how you actually transfer ownership. So there's two types of documents that we're going to be talking about that actually transfer ownership. For instance, on the promissory note, you've got to make sure that not only do you have the note, but you have something called an allonge. Now, the allonge is just a fancy term for basically endorsement. Some banks will actually put a stamp right on the promissory note and say, pay to the order of Mary Doe IRA, and they'll actually sell it to the IRA in that way. But that allonge actually has to accompany it. You actually, and as you well know, mortgage loans are typically sold several times. So when you buy and you're looking to buy a loan, you've got to make sure that the chain, the assignment chain or the allonge chain is actually unbroken, so that the original bank actually gave it allonge to the second bank, who gave it to the third bank, who then gave it to you. So you have to make sure that there's a chain of those allonges on file that actually take you to you. And I'll tell you, that's very, very important. If you don't do that, then you might have some problems when it comes time to actually exercise against the property. All right, next I want to talk about the assignment. Now that actually is the assignment of mortgage. That part is actually filed with the county courthouse. The allonge and the note are not filed. The assignment actually is filed at the courthouse, and it shows that you are the new owner. Just like with the allonge, you've got to make sure that the chain of assignments from the original lender all the way to you is unbroken. Okay. So I really don't want to spend too much time on all this, but until we get into the pricing piece. But there's only so many things that can happen when you either buy or you originate a note. Either it pays or it doesn't pay. Either it performs or it doesn't perform. Now, there's varying degrees of that. For instance, if it doesn't perform, you can foreclose. You might get a deed in lieu of foreclosure. You might get a short sale. You might get it to reperform, and then it starts paying you again. We're not going to really dwell on that today, but we need to understand that we've got to say, okay, what if this borrower pays me, and how much should I pay for the note if thinking he's going to pay me? But how much should I pay for the note if this borrower doesn't pay me? You've actually got to think of both of those eventualities when you're actually buying a note. I see somebody, and every once in a while things are going to pop up in the bottom. An allonge, what exactly is an allonge? An allonge is a document that is actually married, so to speak, to the promissory note. So when you go and you buy a house and you sign your mortgage document or your deed of trust, on the promissory note, in order to transfer that, just like think of it as a check. Like if you write a check out to somebody and hand it to them, they have to flip the check over and endorse it for deposit. Well, you can also, if you wanted to transfer that check, if I wrote you a check, right, and you said, okay, I want to sign that check over to someone else, you would flip it over and say, pay to the order of John Doe, and sign it Mary Doe, and then hand them the check. That is transferring the rights technically of that check to someone else. You could do the same thing. The allonge kind of works just like that with a note. So if you're wanting to transfer your rights in a promissory note, if you are the lender, let's say that I'm XYZ Bank and I give somebody money, but then I want to sell for a mortgage, and I want to sell that mortgage later, then I'm going to marry that allonge with it. I'm going to say I'm endorsing it over to the next bank that I'm selling it to. So that allonge is simply like an endorsement document. Hope that answers that question. So when you're pricing a note, this is where we're going to get into the topic today. When you're pricing a note, you first of all, if you're going to take any kind of journey and start, if you're going to take a trip, you not only have to know where you're at, but you really have to know where you're going to go. You've got to know what that destination is. So when you make any kind of investment, whether it's a real estate investment or whether it is a note investment, you need to understand what your desired yield is. In other words, how much do I want to make on this loan? As you well know, the interest rates today that people can get loans for right now are in the twos, 2.75, 2.625. Do you really want to buy a note that's going to pay you 2.675% for the next 20, 30 years? Probably not if you're an investor such as the folks that are going to be on this webinar are going to be. You're going to want to make a lot more money. So we're going to talk about discounting in just a few minutes and how to actually buy the loan cheaper than what the face amount of the balance is in order to actually make that work for you. So you got to know your desired yield first. The second thing is we've got to determine the net present value of the payment stream. In other words, if I'm going to receive payments of $750 a month for the next 20 years, even though the note rate says 4% or whatever it says, I want to make 14%. We need to actually know what the net present value of the cash flows actually are. And we're going to talk about that in great detail. Also, collateral value. That's if you don't pay. Let's say that borrower just decides I'm going to disappear. And honestly, most of the deals that we buy, actually they're abandoned properties and the people have left and that's it. So we have to actually determine what is the current price of we call it as repaired value, ARV, but also the as is value of the property. So we need to understand those very well. So that goes into what if they don't pay. And then that as I mentioned earlier, we choose a strike price from that. So we determine what would we pay if they pay us, what would they pay if they don't, and then we take the lesser of those two, and that's usually the strike price that our funds buy assets at. So pretty simple, but we're going to talk about how that works. So let's talk about what if they do pay. And discounting it's kind of like a circus whip. If you the closer you get to the maturity of a bond or a loan or whatever, and there's a little bit of movement in the market, the farther out that you go, for instance, if it's 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, the farther out you go, the more you have to adjust that price to bring, say, a 4% note into, yield you 40%, 14% or whatever your desired yield would be. So it works very much like a bond. You actually pay less for the note than what they actually owe you. By the way, this is kind of interesting. When you actually sign a contract with a lender or someone that's selling you a note, that is not filed anywhere. So no one other than the two parties knows what the buyer paid for that particular note. So as far as the borrower is concerned, when you transfer over that $200,000 loan, even though you may have paid, say, $100,000, the borrower doesn't know that. All they know is they owe you $200,000, which is the truth. So you're going to buy that note a lot less than what the actual either the value of the property is or even the cash flow or the current balance is, and that's how we make the yield work. Let's talk about how we do that. So let's say that we've got $100,000 loan, and the face amount of the note. On the note, it says that this note is for 6% and it's for 30 years. In the hypothetical situation on the blue line that you see on your screen, it amortizes over the third, meaning amortize from the Latin word meaning death, mort, to pay down or to kill off the loan. That's what amortization actually means. So as it amortizes down, you can see kind of the curve. But let's say that you wanted to buy it for 18%. Let's say you wanted that 6% to yield 18%. We're going to talk about some math here in a few minutes of how to get to that point. But in this case, you'd have to buy it for $39,500 if they made all of their payments to you of $605 a month for 30 years. You'd have to buy it at $39,500 in order for that to yield you 18% interest, or a yield, I should say, over the term. But here's kind of what's cool about note buying that I really like. Most notes are not carried to maturity like that. They pay off way early. Somebody refinances them, they sell the house, whatever. So let's say that you've bought this to yield 18% over a 30-year period of time, but let's say they pay it off in 36 months. Keep in mind, they still owe you the $100,000 in the beginning, not the $39,500 you paid for. So let's say they came to you in 36 months and said, hey, I'd like to pay off this loan. I'm refinancing it. You say, fantastic, here's the payoff. When can I get my money? Because they're going to pay you the balance on that property, which, as you can see, in 3 years, I've done the math, they'll still owe $96,150. And even though you only paid $39,500 for it, that difference is yours. All that money is yours. The other previous bank, they're not in play there. So I thought this was a very powerful illustration, and I'd like to talk more about it, but honestly, we only have a few minutes today to do this, so bear with me. So if you're going to calculate the cash flow of a property, in other words, a loan, how much it's going to pay, you've got to know three things out of four. There's four variables. There's loan amount. Also, the remaining balance kind of goes along with the loan amount. The interest rate, the term, meaning how long they still have left on the loan, and also what's the payment amount. So if you know any three of those, you can calculate what the fourth is pretty easy with a financial calculator or an amortization schedule, which is what we're going to use here. Now, later on, I'm going to give you my contact information, and I am happy to share with you. If you don't have an amortization schedule or a payment calculator, I can email you one that's a simple Excel spreadsheet, and I'd be happy to do that. But I'm doing this so that you guys can kind of see a simple way to calculate your yield if you're going to buy a note, what you would pay for it if you expect them to pay. So the top gray part here on your screen, on your upper left-hand corner there's a gray box. That's actually the amortization schedule. So you know that, let's say the remaining balance of a note is $200,000. And you know that the face amount of that note is 6%. And you also know that there's 200 months left on that loan, then your payment is going to be $1,593. So that's pretty simple. So as long as you know the remaining balance on the loan, what the interest rate is on the face of the note that you bought, and how many months are left, that should match what the monthly payments are on that particular deal. But here's what you want to do. If you don't touch anything else, but first of all, change the interest rate from that 6%. This is what I'm talking about on the bottom. Change the interest rate to what you want to yield. So in this instance, let's say you wanted to yield 15%. You'd actually change the interest rate from 6% to 15%. And here's what's going to happen. Your payment amount is going to shoot up through the roof, probably more than double. Okay. Then what you'll next do is don't touch anything else, but go back to the loan amount and start through usually just trial and error, lowering that loan amount until the payment amount matches what the original payment amount was. In other words, what is the payment amount of the loan? By the way, we're going to go through an exercise in a minute where we go through the screens. I'm going to show you a little better than what I'm explaining here. But all you're really doing is using an amortization schedule to determine what, if you're getting paid $1,593 a month and you've bought a property at X amount, what's that going to yield you? And this is how you do it. So first of all, just enter in the main terms in your amortization schedule. Second thing you're going to do is then go to the annual interest rate and change that interest rate to what you want to yield, not the 6% on the note, but if you want to yield 12%, 15%, 18%, whatever you want, put that in there. Okay. And then through trial and error, keep reducing the loan amount until the payment amount matches what the original payment on the note is. That will tell you exactly what you need to pay in order to have it yield that particular interest, or that yield that you entered in as the new interest rate. Hopefully that's as clear as mud, but we're going to get into it a little bit differently in a second. So what if they don't pay? And we're going to talk about, like I said, what if they did pay in a minute. We're going to go through some examples. What if they don't pay? That's really simple. It's mainly just the value of the collateral. And if let's say an appraiser goes out and appraises a property, as you all know how that process works, there's really three different ways that appraisers derive value, and they're used for different purposes. The most common of which is what we're going to use, which is the sales approach. That's where you take, and that's the most common, by the way, that's where you take comparable properties in the neighborhood, you look at what they've sold for recently, and then you adjust what you think the value is for that property to what those others are. I wouldn't right now worry about the income approach or cost approach. Those are used primarily for rental properties and also for cost approach for insurance replacement value. But you'll also need to know about how long it's going to take you to foreclose. And we talked about the difference between lien theory and deed theory earlier. Okay. Well, let's kind of move on and talk about the sales approach in general. As I explained, I'll usually use, now, by the way, we do this in-house, but you could do it with Zillow. You can do it with realtor.com. If you're a realtor, a licensed real estate agent, you've got access to the MLS. You already know how to do this. It's pretty simple. So what you're going to do is you're going to look at the map of those properties that have sold, say, in the last 6 months, maybe 12 months. Little tip, I'm going to kind of stray away from the material here. What we do at my company is we try to target, we call it homogeneous neighborhoods. We don't like to buy what we call white elephants. And what I mean by homogeneous neighborhoods are, maybe you call them cookie cutter neighborhoods. We like to find a house. We don't like buying houses that are really unusual. We like it to look a lot like the houses around it, so that we can really get our arms around what the value of that property is by just simply looking at the houses that have sold recently and what they've sold for. Some companies use brokers' price opinions. They'll call them BPOs. We typically don't here. We found we're just as accurate by doing it in-house. So anyway, that's just a brief break from the subject material that we're talking about here. So let's get into the time value of money real quick. Let's say that we expect to sell the property for $150,000. But the note is only going to cost us $100,000. It's going to cost us $5,000 in collection costs. And we know it's going to take us 20 months to actually foreclose on it and sell. That's just what the average time is, maybe in your particular state. I'm just pulling that out of the air. That means we've made, we've got 105,000 into the deal. We've made 45,000 on it. So we've made a 42% raw return, as you can see how I've calculated that. Now I have to annualize it because it's the raw return is very simple, but if it takes you 3 years to make that raw return versus 1.5, obviously you want to compress that into as short a period of time as possible. So we always divide it to a monthly amount, and then we multiply by 12 to annualize it so we can compare our investments. But I do want to get into a couple of examples here relatively quickly. And bear with me just a moment, determining the strike price. So let's say that we have a note for $100,000, 6%, and 240 months that are remaining on it. So we take our amortization schedule that we already have put together. We plug in the numbers, $100,000, 6%, 240 months, and it kicks us back. Should be really super close to what the payment on the actual promissory note is. Says this one is $721. So the next thing we're going to do is, let's say we decide we want to make 12% on that particular note. We actually change the amortization rate or the interest rate to what we want to make, the 12%. But as you can see on the screen, that's really popped that monthly payment up when you're doing it. So it's no longer $721, it's now over $1,100. So the next step that we want to really do is simply, by trial and error, go to that loan amount and start lowering it, moving it around until we actually get back to $721. That'll tell you the maximum amount that you should pay for that particular loan. If you expect it to pay, for instance, if you expect the borrower to pay, that's the maximum amount that you would need to pay in order to yield 12%. Okay, somebody says we're still seeing previous slides. I'm not sure what you guys are seeing. So I'll try to keep going here, and maybe Brian, you could take a look. And somebody just posted that, okay, somebody else is saying they're changing. Maybe something's frozen on your internet there, but perhaps I can talk to you offline and answer any questions that you may have after this. So I'll leave my information there. So when we're determining a strike price, back to the material here, we've already determined from the previous slide that 12% is paying $64,821. So that would yield us, if they pay, if they do pay us, that's what we'd have to pay to yield 12%. What if they don't pay? We know that the current collateral value that let's say that it's $95,000 is what the property is actually worth right now. And let's say that it's in Florida, maybe it'll take 18 months to actually get back, and then another 6% to sell it. Let's assume, say, 5% in total realtor commissions, 2.5 for the selling agent, 2.5 for the listing agent. And then let's say $7,500 in closing costs and legal expenses. I'm just kind of pulling these out of the air. Like I said, we can talk offline about this a little bit more. But it's pretty simple what you do. You simply take the $95,000 that you expect to sell it for, subtract out all of your expenses. The $4,700 is simply your realtor expenses. The $7,500 is your legal expenses. So you expect that you're going to net $82,750 from the sale. You also know that it's going to take you 18 months plus 6 months in order to get your money back and recoup that. So we have to annualize that, and that's what that formula on the right-hand side of your screen simply does. It's just 8 months plus 6 months divided by 12 months in a year, and then you multiply that by the 12% return, and you know that you have to get a raw return of about 24%. Now, here's where the math, I'm sorry, it looks like some people are struggling with their slides. My apologies on that. We'll try to straighten that out as soon as possible. But what we typically do is we'll take the 24% that we have to make over what we expect to be the 2% or the 24% raw return over the 2-year period. And then we figure out what that profit's simply going to be. So we figure the net from the sale is 82,000. I do realize there's a little bit of a flaw in the math, but I'm trying to make it very, very simple for you to do. It's not going to be exact, but it's going to be very, very close. So we take the 82,000, the net from the sale, and we multiply that by the 24%. And that tells us we've got to make 19,000 on that deal. So by subtracting it out, that's how we come up with that strike price. Okay. I'm throwing this out really, really quickly, and I'm trying to move this through in 30 minutes or less. So forgive me, but I do want to go through another kind of example of a deal that we actually looked at so that I can answer any questions. Matter of fact, we're going to get to that very, very, very quick. So we choose the lesser of those two numbers. So what happens if they pay? We know we've got to pay $64,821 in order to yield our 12%. If they don't pay, we've already done the math. We know it's $62,890. We simply choose the less of those two numbers. It's as simple as that. That's how we work. Let's talk about an actual deal. Believe it or not, that actual picture was a deal that we did in our fund, but I am rounding the numbers a little bit to make the math a little bit easier. The ARV as repaired value, we estimated to be about $240,000 for this home. The as is value, $175,000. So if we were to sell it right now, we'd probably get $175,000 for it. We knew the loan balance was about $200,000. The note rate at that point was 7%. Remember when 7% was actually a good interest rate? It's no longer a good interest rate, but I'm sure we'll be back to those days again. The remaining term on this one was about 180 months for a total monthly payment in principal and interest. By the way, this is important. When you're figuring your monthly payments, only count on principal and interest payments, not on your taxes and insurance. Throw that out. That has nothing to do with the note. Okay, that's just taxes and insurance. Only look at the principal and interest, by the way. So the estimated rehab on this is $35,000. We're guessing about $5,000 for the, let's see, how to estimate legal costs. Ask me that question in just a moment, Sophie, and I'll answer that. I'll be happy to answer that question. So let's say just legal costs are going to cost us about $5,000. Time to sell the property would be about 18 months is what we're figuring by the time that we go through the foreclosure process or the getting the deed of trust back, to us and deed in lieu of foreclosure, however we're going to do it. We're estimating about 18 months, but we want to yield 14%. I need to rifle through this very, very quickly because of the time. So I want to give you guys plenty of time to ask questions. So basically we start off just like I talked about earlier. We fill in what the note balance that's left is $200,000. The note, what the actual note rate is 7%. The remaining term is 180 months. So that should give us really, really close to what the monthly payment on the note is. In this case, $1,808. Then we're going to change that. We're going to change that interest rate to 14%. It's going to shoot the monthly payment up, but we're going to slowly drop the loan amount down until that monthly payment equals what it originally was, the 1,808. And that, my friends, is exactly what the max you would pay on this particular loan if they were planning on paying, if you're planning on them paying you in order to yield 14%. But we got to think about what happens if they don't pay us. If they don't pay us, we figure out all of our costs. We find out what our net proceeds are going to be in that fourth line right there. And then we have to figure out, based on the 18 month it takes to sell, divided by the 12 months in a year, times our expected yield, which is 14%. We need to yield at least 21% on this particular deal in order to make it work. So if we've netted our net proceeds of $161,250, we basically are going to have to pay no more than $127,387 in order to actually make this deal work. So we compare the two now. What's the strike price if they pay? $134. What is it if they don't pay? $127. we're going to pay the 127. That's the maximum that we're going to pay. So that's how we do it. But you could take it a step further. We do have certain areas where we will send in construction teams to spruce the place up and actually sell it as a beautiful home, retail home. I'm not going to dwell too much on this because that kind of gets into fix and flipping. I do want to flip it over. Brian, if you could maybe open it up, let's talk about, maybe take some questions thus far, and I can cover some of those areas that maybe I wasn't so clear on. So Brian, how do we do that, my friend? Brian, can you hear me, my friend?
Can you hear me now?
I got you. I got you. I'm ready to take a few questions because I felt like I really had to go through that very quickly, and I'm sure I confused people. I don't want people to leave confused. So let's cover some of those questions.
Okay. Yeah, anyone that has questions, go ahead and type those in the Q&A section, and I will
I
go
know
ahead.
there's a lot of them in the chat.
Yeah, somebody was having some technical issues more in
Okay.
the chat, but a lot of people were fine. The slides were fine. They were changing. It was just maybe one or two off that weren't seeing the slides changing, but we're good.
Okay.
Okay. So what is the difference between a title and a deed?
Okay. A deed in a property is actually an ownership instrument. The deed is actually filed at the courthouse. That's actually the instrument that is filed. Title is just maybe a state that you're in. In other words, I have title to this particular property, meaning that a deed has been filed at the courthouse. So the deed is actually a paper instrument. A title report, a title company will actually go through and do what's called an abstract. It used to be in the old days, they'd send somebody down to the courthouse and they'd rifle through all the documents. Now it's all electronic, of course. So they actually give you a title report, which shows who has owned the property and what liens or clouds are against that particular title. In other words, is it only the person that says they own it? Are there mortgages against it? Are the mechanics liens where the roofer actually made a lien against it? That's actually a title report. The deed's actually just the piece of paper that is filed.
Okay, the next question, this one is more for offline. If you can reach out to Doug Smith directly, his contact information is on the screen.
And don't forget this, Brian, don't forget the CC in the email, by the way. When we originally started, the company was Castle Rock Commercial Capital. We only did commercial property before we moved into residential. I've just never changed the email address. So castlerockcc.com. Sorry.
That would be the best way to ask more exact examples of how you can invest in his fund. So you'd have to reach him directly for that answer to that question.
This is intended to be an educational thing. We want to be very careful not to overstep that. So I don't want to sound like a salesman on here, if you don't mind, but I'm happy to discuss that offline.
Yeah, definitely offline. Okay, where does one find these types of properties in a county?
Okay, the term properties, by the way, you have to be really careful because, and I know a lot of people when they first start out say, I want to buy the property. You're actually not buying the property, you're buying the loan against the property, if that makes sense to you. So it's hard to get out of that. I want to buy the property. And honestly, I used to slip up myself. So you're actually buying the loan against the property. You're not buying the property. Sometimes you will get the property back because they'll quit paying you. A lot of times they've disappeared. And they want out of the deal. I got to be honest, most of the time we don't have to go to foreclosure. Usually we'll get a hold of the borrower and say, hey, listen, you owe us X amount of dollars. The property is worth a lot less than that. You're 2 years past due on the mortgage. You've moved out. I'm sure there's been a pain in the neck and just an albatross around your neck. How about if you sign it over to us and we'll just waive the remainder of the deficiency balance? Will that work for you? That normally is how that whole thing goes, by the way. So you're actually buying the loan, and until you either foreclose or they sign a deed in lieu of foreclosure, you don't own the property. Where do we find them? I'll tell you, a lot of times they're funds. Some funds will sell them. I'll tell you, people will walk into banks and ask to buy them. Banks really don't sell them that much anymore. You kind of got to know who to go to behind the scenes in the back office to be able to buy notes. But a lot of servicing companies, whether it's BSI or SN or all of these different companies around the country that actually service loans. That's another place to go for them. Usually most of the places that we get them are other people that deal in them that may need some liquidity in their portfolios. So we'll buy them from them.
Okay, the next question, if a house is abandoned, who pays the note?
Nobody. This is one of those things that you have to understand is that the note, you have purchased the note, you have become the bank. So let's say that Wells Fargo gives the customer the loan 5 years ago. The crops turn brown, whatever happens, they fall into bad times, they lose a job, whatever. The borrower just quits paying for whatever reason. And you say, okay, I'm going to buy that note from Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo is actually selling it to you. So if you've ever had a mortgage, I'm sure you've gotten a letter shortly after you close that says you're now the new mortgage holder is this bank or this servicer or whatever. That's really what you're doing. You become the bank. So you are the bank. Okay, does that make sense? So nobody's paying the note. It's not getting paid. You're the one not getting paid. So you've got to figure out, how do I recoup my money? And that's where this all comes in: the note investing, collecting, working with the servicer to get the money back, working out a deal to get them paying again. There's a lot of different methods that you can use. Hopefully that answers that question.
Okay, there's a question here. Is there a possibility to get a copy of the slides from you?
Sure. Reach out to me and I'll print them off in a PDF form and email them to you.
Okay, the next question, how likely is it for an IRA holder to be able to buy an individual note?
Depends on the size of your IRA. I'm going to go off of the subject of pricing for a second. It is legal, and I'm going to let the good folks at NewView explain the legalities of this. It is permissible for your IRA to borrow money, believe it or not you, but your IRA. So if you've got the Doug Smith IRA at NewView, it can actually buy the note and actually borrow money in order to buy that note or buy that property. Okay. Here's the key. Doug Smith personally cannot be obligated. So they can't sign, Doug Smith can't sign as a guarantor. Doug Smith IRA is the one that's doing it. So some people will leverage, meaning they'll borrow money, but the IRA has to borrow money. Other IRAs have grown to a point where it's very easy for people in an IRA to actually own. So they have quite a bit of money in there. If you don't have a lot, call me. We'll talk about some different methods that maybe you can work through it. But you could conceivably borrow, but I'll leave the legality of that up to the good folks at NewView.
Yeah, the only type of leverage you could borrow would be a non-recourse loan. If you have any questions or need a list of non-recourse lenders, reach out to myself. I'm happy to provide that to you. Okay.
So
we'll move on to the next question. What drives the expected yield? Is it just based on individual preferences or is it something else?
I'm going to say individual preferences, but also the market. Good example, we were really heavy back in, say, 2010, 2011 in buying notes. And then in June of 2014, a really large fund out of Texas called Lone Star was sitting on about 8.3 billion with a B in cash that they had to deploy. And if they didn't deploy that cash, they weren't going to make their fees on that money. So they ended up buying all 16 of the huge chunks. HUD every once in a while comes out and sells notes to these different funds to raise capital. So I think there were 23, 24 big monster hedge funds with all kinds of money that were bidding on these huge portfolios. And Lone Star bought every single one of them in June of 14, and they bought it at a price that was unbelievable. They bought it at like 77% of the market value of the collateral. Now that sounds like you're getting a big discount, but when you do the math, it doesn't. When we started in 2010, I was paying anywhere from, say, 30 to 35% of the current market value of the collateral. So if the loan was 110,000, the property was worth 100, I was paying 30 to 35,000 for that note. Prices really started to go up And as more and more people kind of figured out, hey, this is a good place to put my money, particularly the big hedge funds that had way too much money to throw at it. And they bought it at 77.6%, which I thought was too high. Then later I learned that there were some legal reasons why they did it, but all the other fund managers that I talked to were kind of scratching their heads over that purchase. So it is personal preference, but it's also what the market will bear.
Okay, the next question, I'll answer the first part of this. What are you promoting here today? We're just providing education for people that are interested in this niche of investing using things like a self-directed IRA. The next part of the question is, Doug, do you have any type of educational courses? Because people would like to learn more from you specifically.
How do I say this? I had been approached a long time ago to do different courses, and a lot of those were very short courses, say, over a day, 2 days, 3 days. And I think I said something similar to this earlier. There is no way that I can pack 30 years of experience into, 3 days or a day or whatever. That being said, we do some consulting for some folks on this side, which kind of goes back to what are you promoting? Honestly, we're doing this mainly for exposure. We meet some new people who may or may not be investors down the road with us. But this is just an educational thing. And that's why you obviously haven't seen us list even our logo on this thing. It's more education for the folks that are customers of NewView and potential customers of NewView.
Okay, this is
does that answer the question? Actually, you know what? You can reach out to me afterwards, and perhaps we can maybe work with you in one way, shape, or form to see what you actually are looking for us to do.
Okay, so this is a little bit of a question regarding the financial calculator. The HP12C financial calculator will provide the strike price by just changing.
I have one. I got to find it.
I think the question is by changing the initial rate, as you said, and putting org payment amount back into the calculator, the new PV will show that is the new strike price. That is correct.
That's correct. I was trying to do it with something that was visual. So I used I simply used a run-of-the-mill amortization schedule where you plug in the variables and it pops out a payment. And of course, it's meant to pop out a payment. It's not meant to pop out the net present value like the HP12C will. Great calculator, by the way. I'm on my third, and that's in 30 years. So, but yeah, it'll work like that too. You can actually put in the payment amount, put in the remaining term, put in what you're wanting to yield, and it will kick back that amount that we were putting in the loan number, as opposed to going and doing a trial and error. You got it.
Where is the best place to search the title of the property if not hire a title company?
I'll tell you, is everybody got a pen available? I'm going to give you the greatest website ever right now. It is netronline.com. NET as in Tom, R online.com. I kind of think it's white with some green, I think, when you get onto it. But when you pick search, it will show a map of the United States. Click on the state. It's going to actually open up every single county in the entire country. So if you click on Ohio, it'll pop up every single county in Ohio in alphabetical order. When you click on that particular county, it will give you the searchable website for the tax assessor, the county appraiser, also the clerk of court. So typically what you're going to do is go into the clerk of court. You may have to also go into the property appraiser, the tax assessor, to find what they call the folio number, which is the number that and different states are different, by the way, different counties are different. And some of the rural counties, by the way, are really not that great online searchable as of yet. But if you have that folio number and you go to the actual clerk of court, you'll either put in the person's name, you might be able to put an address, you might be able to put the folio number, and it should pop up a lot of information. That being said, different title companies are out there that are on a national level that can actually give you a pretty affordable report if you need to.
Can you repeat that website one more time?
N as in Nancy, ET as in Tom, RONLINE.com.
Thank you.
And if anybody's pulled that up and can confirm that I was not crazy.
Nope, there's a few people that did pull it up. I think
Good.
somebody might have typed it incorrect.
You go to the searchable spot there, and it will give you information on any property in the entire country, pretty much. I mean, some counties are offline that are rural, but for the most part, most of the major counties you can get information from.
This is one of my favorite questions. I'm a new note investor. Can you recommend any books to read and any workshops to learn about note investing?
Yes, and doggone it, you know what I'm going to try to do here? Bear with me. Have I screwed up the screen here?
No.
I meant to write this down. Tell you what, Jane, if Jane is out there, Jane Wobbs, okay, I'm $5 says she's out there.
There.
Is she good? Jane, can you type in the name of the book that I read? It's very, here's my problem. I've been doing this 30 years and sometimes I forget the basic steps. So if you're building a house, you got to start with the foundation. Sometimes I jump straight to the roof. My apologies if I did that. Jane, if you could type that in here. Aha, look, Jane. Great, she's here. Jane, can you type that in? And Brian, can you read that out for me, please? Because there's a book that she actually shared with me a while back that was very good. It was very basic. And my apologies, Jane, I meant to write that down and share it. So I'll let Brian share that when he can see what Jane types in.
Yeah, Jane just typed it, or she is typing it in the chat. Let's see. Oh, The Paper Profits by Josh Andrews. And he actually presented for us a few months back too. So you can watch his recording. He does talk about his book. It's in our blog section. And then to answer the next question, yes, this is being recorded. We post all of our webinars on our blog and social media, and we can send you a recording if you like. We can send you the link to our blog, but it should be posted by Friday morning. You'll probably see it, or end of the day Friday. If you just go to newviewtrust.com, click on the blog section, you'll find lots of content there.
And if your question can't wait, shoot me an email, call me. That's my personal cell number, by the way. I can't believe I put that on there, huh? What else we got there, Brian?
Let's see. We have some great questions here. After acquiring the note, who will manage the loan?
Good question. Depends on the type of loan. We started before Dodd-Frank. So we actually managed everything, and I mean everything in-house. We did hire a servicer. There are several companies called servicers, or even they call them servicers that will handle, for instance, SN. You've probably heard of that company. You've probably heard of, let's see, Madison is another one out there, BSI. There's one out of California that also does it pretty inexpensively. But basically what you do is you get with your servicing company, and you'll contract with them, and you'll typically pay them a monthly fee. They'll send out the statements, they'll collect the payments, they'll post the payments, they'll make sure that everything stays legal for you and compliant. After Dodd-Frank and the CFPB kicked in, there became a lot of issues about what you were allowed to do. Were you allowed to directly contact your client, or did the servicer have to do it? We typically will, and we do work with servicers. I'm not going to recommend anyone because then it becomes a sales pitch session, and we don't want to do that today. But what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to get with that servicer and actually make sure that you're on the same page of how you want these things collected, because they'll actually make the phone calls for you. There is a fee for that. But honestly, if you're managing a lot of notes and you're trying to be compliant, that's the right way to do it anyway. I will say this: if it's commercial, and I know the last time I heard the CFPB chat at a conference, there was kind of a gray area whether investment property, non-owner occupied property, was commercial or residential in their eyes, and still fell under that. I would still have the servicer handle that.
Okay, this next question, it's a good one. Once pricing is calculated, do you negotiate with the bank for, hold on, or do the banks make an offer and you calculate if amounts work?
The answer is yes. It's what I mean by that is different for different people. A lot of the folks that we buy from, we have already bought from, and I simply say, come on, just tell me what you want for the note. And if we make it work, great. If not, that's okay too. First person that talks loses. And I pray to God that nobody's on here that I buy from. So, first person that talks typically loses. I try to get them to tell me what they'll want. Good story. And actually, one of the big banks that I worked for was Wells Fargo, First Union, then Wachovia, then Wells Fargo. And I'd left the bank, and there was a commercial piece of property that actually, believe it or not, my old boss had made, and I didn't even know it when I bought it until I looked at the file. And it was on a retail center. And the guy was relatively new. That was the special assets officer that I was dealing with. And we played this game back and forth. What do you want? I don't know. What do you need for it? You know, and finally I calculated it out that I would pay $850,000 for the asset. And then finally said, well, would you pay us 700 for it? And I'm trying to shut my mouth, you know. Okay, I guess we can do that. So to answer the question, there's really no way that it's normally done. But I will tell you this, you can't just walk into a bank branch and ask to buy their notes. The person that's in there is not going to know. It's usually, you've got to get to the special assets officer. And, you know, and a lot of times you do that through other people that, like, for instance, me. Sometimes I'll go in for somebody and say, hey, we can find this and sell it off to them, whatnot. So it is a game. It is a game.
Write that down. Special assets manager.
The special assets group. Yeah. That's of a bank. Of a servicer, you know, who's handling the non-performing. Non-accrual is another word. Non-accrual, like the accounting word accrual. Banks use that term as well.
What is the current market yield on performing notes?
I'm probably the wrong guy to answer that because our target is primarily non-performing. I think it really depends on, personally, I really think it depends on the fund that's buying. If you're a smaller group and you're not buying as much, you can probably get away with higher yields. If you're a bigger fund and you're trying to build your portfolio, you're going to have to take some smaller yields, and it's going to bring everything down a little bit just so you can deploy the assets that you've got in the portfolio.
Any online marketplaces you'd recommend to find notes on which you can bid?
I haven't really used the onlines, to be honest. I know they're out there. I know FCI's got one, or at least they used to have one. I don't know. I'm trying to think of the big one. There's a really big one, and it's escaping me. But we typically don't use the online auction houses. I really hate doing the auctions. I really prefer to work with somebody that I already know. I will tell you this: there have been times where we've worked with new people, and when I typically work with new people, I really make sure that we have a very careful step in place with an intermediary in place to where we make sure that we're getting all the documents that we've requested. If it's somebody that I've worked with many times before, then usually we'll cut a deal just off of what I'm seeing online that they've posted. You know, that I've looked at the note, I've looked at the, you know, in their, what they call them, a deal room, which is basically just a Dropbox section. You go in and you pull the documents and you look at the version. We'll cut a deal. I'll wire in the money, and a few days later, the files show up at the door. So
you mostly
probably the guy to ask. I'm sorry.
Do you mostly buy from banks or private?
I'm sorry. Could you repeat that, Brian?
Do you buy your notes from mostly banks, or do you also buy private?
Commercial from banks, the residential from private.
There you go. Also, Jane did put a link in the chat if you would like to download that book for free. Just go ahead and click that link.
Jane's awesome. I met Jane. I think it was at an IMN conference I was speaking at in, let's say, Fort Lauderdale or Miami, that area. And Jane approached me after I came off stage, and we had a real nice talk, and really great person. So thank you, Jane, for your help. I appreciate it. I mean, by the way, I'm even fatter in person. So Jane, look at that.
We're going to wrap up the Q&A from here. There are lots of questions that we didn't get to, but feel free to go ahead and reach out to Doug. He's more than happy to talk to you one-on-one if we didn't get to your question. And then as far as reaching myself, you can, if you want to download our e-guide, just text capital S, capital D, capital I, capital R, capital A to 484848. Please include your first and your last name, and you can download a free self-directed IRA e-guide. Also, my direct contact information is available for you as well. My direct phone number here is 407-519-9172. or you can email me at bmartinez@newviewira.com. Once again, Doug, thank you so much for sharing all your tips, tricks, and some of that great information. You have a lot of experience in this industry. I'd love to bring you back again in the future. Maybe we can dive in deeper, hit some more of the, the harder topics that we haven't covered, some more strategies as well, and some case studies that you've done. You have some great examples. And thank you everyone for joining us today. And we hope to see you on our next webinar.
Thank you. Hope you got value out of it.
Definitely, it was great. I learned a
Call me
lot.
if you need me. You know how to get a hold of me. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Doug. Bye,
Bye-bye,
everyone.
everybody.